post the pictures of Silktown on its public social media accounts. Silktown was once a digital market where people sold their handmade clothes made of silk. From 2016, the local government have started the redevelopment initiative called Engineering the City Face. Following the redevelopment initiative, all the historic buildings in Silktown are installed with artificial lights and high resolution LED screens. Shining buildings constitute the even the most illusory spectacles of the city, but the lived experience of being instead dystopian. The bright lights render the photo illusion of the city, but the dark nights still disturbs and with multiple attractive glows under the lights, while the local government puts up the backdrop blueprints in those bright lights. Citizens have to impose to blow up some concrete tracks in conflict with the blueprint. A comment below this social media post just said the goals of the merchant cannot be following the market management committee does not therefore consider the interests of merchant but only makes a good looking service. Due to the redevelopment, the business is getting worse and worse. What is the use of this initiative? Rents increase day by day. We only hear about service. It's such a hypocritical silk culture. Really worth seeing. This conflict can be traced to very long-lasting discussion on Chinese modernity, about modernization in past decades of rapid urbanization. The context is, like scholars call what happened in the past decades, maelstrom of modernization leading to large scale of demolition and destruction. However, there are also many artistic rewriting of the urban space in some of the contemporary Chinese films, and also the very pervasive anti-urbanism sentiments, which is the skepticism of the modernization. And this context just continues until now. And in this specific case of Hangzhou, Hangzhou is a city where high-tech lighting has become the most prominent urban aesthetics. Generally, Hangzhou is considered as the digital city of China, for it is the home to the most famous Chinese multinational tech company called Alibaba, specializing in e-commerce, internet, and top technology. And since 2016, the local government has started a lot of urban experiments with new media. To map this period, I list the key digital experiments led by local governments of Hangzhou below. And as you can see, since 2016, Hangzhou local government has implemented the smart city initiative called City Brain. But before 2016, Hangzhou was already famous for the rise of digital economy and internet enterprise, coinciding with ongoing digital governance reform led by central government. The central government also the potential of digital infrastructure that Hangzhou has worked for years. In return, the local government started the development of urban digital networks in response to the central government's ongoing reform, and artificial lights constitute the spectacle of the modern digital city, which the authorities have pursued for years. For example, the office proposed management of integrated cityscape in 2016 and planning urban lighting in 2017 are key to all the redevelopment plans. Meanwhile, now this is an example of how the artificial lights works. It's a sound of flying drones, flying the eye, and and all the people around this area can see these illustrated spectacles. And meanwhile, the local government started to upload videos of these bright cityscapes on social media channels, promoting the facets as a must-see stores and encouraging targeted sharing, location targeted sharing. In this sense, the spectacle of modern city consists of advanced lighting technology and also digital networks in which official media channels represent, promote, and distribute the light shows. The emergence of the official media channels is part of the agenda of digital governance in China. The authority seeks to establish as many social media channels as possible to communicate with citizens who use mobile phones in everyday life. State power has continuously tapped into the technological infrastructure of the digital platforms, but for the up-to-date governance, the Chinese government refreshes the traditional media such as newspapers or television by creating social media accounts. In this sense, Chinese government also renders the new media both by harnessing the potential disruptive power of the new platforms. Yeah, and the picture is an example of how they posted the videos of the live shows on these official media accounts. And so my concern will be how do citizens experience, engage with, and respond to the urban spectacles that the local authorities have made through social media channels, and what is the role of digital technologies, including lighting technology and digital platforms, in multiple social relations among citizens and authorities. Due to the time limit, I may skip the methodology part, but if I have time, I will explain this later. Basically, I identified 110 videos and pictures they post, and I investigated the comment section of all the social media posts. And finally, I identified 3 discourse through all the comments around the visual materials. The first one is a sense of togetherness, which people tend to gather around the buildings and look up together to the light shows. It is conveyed through the official discourse of national unity, but also a time attained by the citizens who integrate it in their everyday language. I would say that the national narrative intrudes on the activity of one city, and the togetherness of a city is gradually integrated into the togetherness of the nation. For example, on February 8th, 2020, just after the coronavirus outbreak in China, the light shows immediately react. Light show in Hangzhou immediately react to the national narrative, defeating the COVID with a state of unity. The architectural complex in Hangzhou illuminates the texture of Wuhan. Wuhan is the first city that the corona virus happens, and with the image of peace showing that Hangzhou solidarity with Wuhan, but how my concern is how citizens respond to this spectacle of unity established through the infrastructure and the symbolic construction. My observation is that they do not necessarily follow the hegemonic discourse of unity, nor do they see themselves as discrete subjects out of the activity. For example, for the chair of Wuhan display, there are a number of comments like chair of Hangzhou, Wuhan, China fights the epidemic and win. But amongst all the comments, a long one shows how people address this kind of spirit of unity. This user says, I will show the doctors, government officers, soldiers, police researchers, media practitioners, and pandemic prevention officers are happy that Larkin Festival, you have your part to protect each city on this land. Now, the most wanted news is that the coronavirus has been shown, and no one is infected anymore. For protect yourself and your family, and we will work together to tie over the difficulties those happen. That day was the Latin Festival, a traditional festival for family and communal reunion in China. This user sees the country as community for the same goal and addresses all the people involved with care as if they are intimate with persons. But is this care for community also means even if the subject comes from the spectrum of nationalism, the everyday language of intersubjective relations remains. In other words, although citizens articulate a sense of political principle unity as an harmonic discourse brings into it, the way they articulate still refers to everyday language through which they interact with families or as if they are families and friends in daily life. Besides, the everyday language is typified by another pattern in the comments. I find that sometimes do not go in the mini making of the spectacles of national unity. Instead, they see the display merely as a sightseeing location where they can physically reunite with their friends and families. The evidence that they made piles of ask someone in the comments below, usually followed by let's go, did you see or not, are you free on that day, and so on. Someone even joked about their friend for buying flight tickets for them to watch the show. It is because that the days when the local government curates live shows are mostly holidays. For example, since 2016, the local government has held 5 annual live shows on the National Day. Usually, citizens have this off on the National Day. It means that to be a spectator of the propaganda show is no more than a way they seek renew and leisure during holidays. Another example of everyday language interpretation of the spectacle is a conversation below the live shows on National Day, where someone was asking about the flag raising ceremony on national holiday. This conversation shows how the military flag raising ceremony becomes kids' daily rituals and performance in kindergarten and primary school. Their focus is not really on the symbolic construction of the monuments, but on the everyday rituals that this monument brings about. The word "cues" suggests that we see the flag raising ceremony as no more than a children's school activity. This is, I think that this slideshow is a place that condenses the whole city into this brightly lit focal point during this national holiday. But when their focus is primarily on everyday rituals, light shows may exist as simply as a material presence that invalidates the symbolic construction of the national togetherness. The base is no longer fixed but opened by when it's opened by the digital communication, the symbolic meaning of the unity just sometimes comes into a voice. And the protocols and practice of digital platforms, such as comment section, constitute the aspect of togetherness that people experience in the city, but they do not only contribute to the spectacle of national unity, but also the everydayness of the rituals and that possibly invalidates the hegemonic meaning production. And the second discourse is being realistic about spectacular light shows. It means that citizens they want to condemn the official imagery as unrealistic, pointing out that what it depicts is not reality. And normally what is represented in the videos and what people comment are in strong contrast. On the one hand, it was not until high-resolution LED process emerged that the official shows gained popularity online. Those LED displays, just like this Panda one, often label themselves as ultra-realistic 3D display or glasses-grade 3D show. With the technology support of augmented reality technology, the objects on the screen are lifelike and seems to jump out of the viewing surface. Maybe not only the blueprint of the city, but the presence of the media technologies themselves are already a spectacle of modernity. However, despite the lifelike images, augmented reality shows are also a hyper-mediated representation form, making the visual fakery even more recognizable. The hyper-mediated images are confronted with what citizens considered as unmediated social facts which contact the spectacle of the modernity. Citizens are not necessarily immersed into the official imaginary. Instead, they keep their distance from it, just like most long comments are concerned with urgent issues, for example, not being immersed in spectacles but confronting the truth. Sometimes we can just blow up some social facts in the comment section. Beside all this, citizens just also directly question who is this show for? Is anyone watching? Will they just show up to the show? This user points out the fakery of all these shows will lead nowhere. No one in the city will be the spectator, even if the writer is ambitious to condense the whole city into this specific space. And also, the local government curates the light show for the celebration of National Day every year, but last year it used to devote a number of critical comments referring to the national-wide electricity limits. That's the second comment. The context is that in September 2021, because of the energy crisis, the Chinese government implemented strict control on electricity use nationwide. The power restrictions led to the large-scale shutdown of industrial production, first in the and the residential electrical supply was also cut off in several provinces. So people have to cope with the abrupt power shortage in their daily life. In response to the national news, one of the comments is, "There's no need to turn on so many lights. Electricity is limited all over the city. Why do you turn on so many lights?" The spectacle of brightly lit city exactly points to the social division and unequal infrastructure of electricity. In this case, the artificial light itself constitutes modern city spectacle, but the implicit design and satire show how people question it. The comment sections where they can get communicative resources in digital networks to resist the dominant narrative. The third discourse clearly related to the second is the utopian imaginary. While some comments radically point out the fakery of the visuals, others imagine the city will be a better one. The bright lights are also represent the bright future that one can imagine. There are several types of utopian imaginary of the city, such as smart city, global city, historic city, environmentally friendly city. Due to the time limit, I will just introduce one example. Like in the past 2 years, the local governments increasingly mentioned green energy saving, environmentally friendly when it's introduced the special area where sports game will be held and athletes will live in the Asian Games, which will be held in next year. And in January this year, in a post, the lighting of Asian Games Village in Hangzhou is on. They specifically mentioned the building's soft color and energy-saving design under the slogan "Green Intelligence, Greenity, and Energy-Saving and Civilized." And the video is a panorama of all the high buildings in the village, which is filmed by the remotely controlled drones flying in the air. Thus, the viewer can see all the buildings in bird's eye view, overlooking the whole city, imagining their utopian future. As mentioned above, a lot more critical comments question the actual blueprint of the city. Does not represent the big experience of the city, because some social facts are left behind the so-called whole picture. But some comments have more nuanced position. For example, in comment section, there is a debate on the redevelopment and update of the digital infrastructure. One comment points out that the massive construction has troubled the civic life, especially the engineering of the ground for the first subway line in Hangzhou. But another user just like this, digging everywhere and surrounded by the construction site. Another user replied this comment and said that the stage will pass. This user said, "No, I'm looking forward to G20. G20 is an international event that was held in Hangzhou in 2016." And this user continues, "Hangzhou is a tourist city. The tourists and international events will compel the local governments of Hangzhou to repair the destroyed roads. Anyway, we will benefit from it. Although the construction teams are digging everywhere now, we should feel present because there will be a subway in the future and Hangzhou will become better and cleaner." In this reply, this user imagines a utopian future with more convenient public transportation, but at the expense of temporary disruption. This user is also aware that the government's imagery necessarily masks some ugly facts, but this user saw masking as a good thing because the mask could push the government to repair the actual disruption and maintain the mask. Another example of the nuanced attitude is a comment on the chair of Wuhan light show that I mentioned above. And the top comment reveals the victory. When the top comment reveals victory that it is just a show, another comment contradicts this criticism. And this user said, "Why it is just a show? I think it is good. Mental health is health, so is mental health. If you think everything is so bad, how do you walk through the darkness?" This user is also aware that the government is staging the spectacle of the national unity, but this user considers this necessary because it provides mental health for the Chinese so that people are mentally prepared to combat the coronavirus outbreak. February 2020 was a time when people all around China lived in great fear of the virus because no expert had figured out how it works then. And donations from other cities to Wuhan seemed not to work very well, so people doubt if there was corruption in the charities. This user saw all of these clearing up videos as mental health, with which people could go through all the difficulties. Likewise, another nuanced comment described her personal lived experience under the videos of all these slideshows. During the year of living here, I did feel that smart Hangzhou brings convenience to life, and I never regretted that I chose Hangzhou for my first job after graduation. However, it seems that I am not so attached to this city at present. Maybe as the saying goes, I do not recognize my happiness amid happiness. It made me think that we may not simply reduce the spectacle to something structurally determined. The problem is how people recognize, or first of all, can they recognize what their recognition leads to? The emergence of spectacles in cities is never clear without closely examining how people perceive these spectacles and reorient themselves. Contrary to Queiroz thought that individuals do not have their own gesture towards spectacles, there is much more nuanced engagement here in my research. For example, in the comments, the user effectively feels the dissonance that their life is not exactly what the propaganda depicts, but this user do not clearly recognize it. All the examples above also provide different effective practice, considering its positive effect on reality, regarding its as curing method, and on certainly hoping its generating. The tension here is between utopian promise of the city and the citizens' necessary recognition of how the spectacle their awareness of how the spectacle detached from lived reality. Many practice and photos on social media platforms hold attention to concrete ambivalence in experience towards utopia. Yeah, that's all.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'd like to thank you, the organization, especially Miguel. Obrigada pela acolhida. It's a pleasure for me to present this work, the analysis of the structure of Rio de Janeiro Metropolitan area by Nightscape, despite it will be a hard work after so many great presentations. I'm a professor at the Architectural Graduate Program at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The idea to study the city lights began many years ago during the night flights when I used to observe the landscape and verify how I could perfectly see the territory and city structures, also their connections, streets and roads. The study I will present is related to research, project planning and landscape developed by the research group project and representation of the environment that I coordinate with the professor Aline Verol, where Desirée is developing the doctoral thesis. Desirée couldn't be here with us because his baby decided to be born last Sunday. She's developing her nightscape studies at the city of Porto Alegre, south of the country. The group has now 42 participants among professors, graduate and undergraduate students. We receive different grants from the Foundation to Support Research of the State of Rio de Janeiro and from the National Council of Research. We are especially grateful to Professor Marina Lima, my first partner at this research. The energy infrastructure represented by the nightscapes is part of the landscape, which is a result of the political, cultural, and technical actions. We can study these in a morphological approach, but also in a cultural and social approach. The morphological approach observes the city lights visualized from space, allows us to identify more clearly the difference between the open space and the occupied ones. Also, allows to identify different light patterns related to urban patterns, borders, centralities, and connections. Night satellite images are used in social research to a substitute for population estimates, economic activities, gas emission, light pollution, disaster management, urban dynamics, and epidemiology. The nightscapes are studied by the analysis of light spaces and dark spaces, exploring the Milton Santos concept. Milton Santos was a very important Brazilian geographer who wrote about the bright and opaque spaces. The bright spaces could be a rich global with infrastructure, digital, connected, and the opaque space a poor, non-global, without infrastructure, analogical, and isolated. In this research, we are trying to prove that all the light space receive the basic urban infrastructure, but the ones most bright are, in fact, the Milton Santos bright spaces, who receive more investments and political attention, and the ones less bright are the opaques, with less power of representation. We introduce the dark space as a non-occupied areas, the open space system. The concepts addressed in the research were defined in theoretical discussions involving the members of the group and cover those related to urban space and those related to lighting. The main objective is to create a methodology for analyzing the nightscapes that contributes to understanding the structuring of urban space, observing how artificial lightings builds and transforms landscape, and understanding it's a strong representation of the territory. The specific objectives are: identify in the light space the urban structure, especially the centralities and connections associated to different bright and colors. Relate dark space to the open space system, understanding the electricity infrastructure network as an action of urbanization and occupation. Analyze the impacts of illuminated space on dark space from the studies of edge, abruptus, and buffer zones, and also observing the informal occupation. Analyze the different patterns created by the lights and associate them to the social and economic aspect. You don't have work on the last two objectives yet. The cartography is the principal method adopted at these studies. There is a great difference between the Rio de Janeiro metropolitan area, is in purple, and the geographic scope of the study, which was defined by the image that covers the entire Guanabara Bay and the cities around. This cut, however, involves the region with the highest population density and with the greatest flows of people and goods. The first cartography we called light map. The night image was redrawn, creating the light map defined by just two categories, lightscapes and dark space, regardless of the illuminance or temperatures of the light perceived in the image. The second map compares the light areas with the urban occupied areas. The daylight image was redrawn, creating the occupied map, occupants map, the urban occupants map, defined by two categories, open space and occupied space. The light map and the urban occupation map were overlaid for comparative analysis. The presence of light corridors and different spots of light concentration direct the investigation towards the identification of an urban network in the night landscape, structured by paths and points. For better identification, two image manipulation procedures were developed. First, create a filter, this one, to reduce the visualization of street lighting illuminance and highlight the illuminance coming from the automotive's headlights. Create a filter that allowed to give greater preeminence to the areas of great luminous emissions, either by concentrations or by intensity. By using the two images, it was possible to create a single map, luminous urban network, considering the light centers and their connections. Based on this map, three levels of light centralities were defined, considering the size of luminous point and the number of connected luminous lines. The first and the second analysis confirms the expectation. Illuminated and occupied space reaffirm the urbanization process, where occupied areas are provided by basic infrastructures in most part of the study areas. In the same way, darks and open space also resulted in what was expected, considering that they are in large part areas of sea or environmental protection. The most important analysis is about the unexpected occurrence. Dark and occupied space were identified as possibility for daylight use only, such as industrial areas. Light and open spaces can be possible for options. Major roads and Rio-Niterói Bridge that stand out at night due to the light emission of the highlights, a fact that demonstrates the permanent flows and its importance in the road extrusions of the region. Some apparent unbuilding space, but which are lit, may possibly have irregular occupation covered by vegetation, but they also need to be verified in the field. Points of light at the sea, especially in Guanabara Bay, which correspond to the ships, demonstrating the importance of the Rio de Janeiro port. Here also, the ships and the bridge. Waterfront of beach and lagoon reaffirmed the importance of nightlife all over the ocean shores of Rio de Janeiro and Niterói. Here's the Flamengo Park. The second comparative cartographies use the map of luminous urban network and the map of centralities prepared by the strategy plan for integrated urban development of the metropolitan region of Rio de Janeiro, which were overlaid. This is the strategy planning and the light network. All light centers coincide with some centrality, but several centralities, mainly regional subcenter and regional center, did not stand out in the light centers. The major light center, the center of Rio de Janeiro, coincides with the metropolitan center in size and number of luminous lines, consolidating itself as the greatest luminous centralities. Copacabana, Ipanema, and Leblon, on the south shore, with great tourist and high income appeal, shines as light center of third level. Barra da Tijuca is also a third level light center, but was defined as a metropolitan subcenter in the strategy plan, thus verifying an expectation of its valorization and growth not yet consolidated. On the other hand, Jacarepaguá, here, a second level light center is classified as a regional subcenter in a clearly mistaken way. In the north, the centralities of Duque de Caxias, São João do Meriti, and Nova Iguaçu, mentioned in the strategy plan only as regional subcenter, are clearly also a second level light center, another possible mistake. Niterói and São Gonçalo are confirmed as second level lights, here, light centers, aligned to the strategy plan. However, in the west region of Guanabara Bay, there is a light centrality, here, Itaipu, not even classified as regional subcenter, clear another possible mistake in planning actions. Thus, there are many coincidences, but also great difference, pointing to the need to evaluate light centralities as complementary data, such as land use or demographic data. The great difficulty of the research is the lack of availability of the images. This work presents the initial results of the research, whose methodology is being largely improved in the doctoral thesis in architecture. Night landscape of Porto Alegre, luminous morphologies and effects on urban vitality and health. She's in the final phase, quite conclusion. The next steps involve focus on improving the study of light patterns by crossing urban morphologies with demographic and economic data. Analyze the impacts of illuminated space on dark space from the study of edge as ruptures and or buffer zones. It is expected that this research will bring in the future developments in terms of contribution to urban planning, especially lighting master plan and to landscape planning. Thank you. Obrigada.